Clearly, this person's reading a lot of news accounts, and he's mocking the police, he's threatening to do more. These are not cutesy letters. They're very vile, they're very clever, they're very taunting, they are extremely degrading to the victims, and what you begin to see is even letters that look random and very unskilled, there's something deliberate about everything. What's really horrible is you start admiring this person. You go, God, this is a genius.
Cornwell thought she detected Sickert's hand in many of the Ripper letters, but that still didn't put him at a crime scene. In fact, one of the criticisms leveled at Cornwell's theory is that Sickert wasn't even in London at the time of the murders.
We have reams of evidence. We have several different letters from various sources during September and October of 1888, which place Sickert in France during at least 4 of the 5 murders.
Nobody has shown me a document that proves that, for example, on the night of one of these homicides that we know about, that he absolutely was in some other place. Unless somebody can show me something definitive, there is no document that absolutely places him in France on the exact night that one of these crimes occurred.
Sickert's artwork also offers no definitive evidence as to where he was at the time of the murders. There is a London music hall sketch dated September 29th, but no year is given, which is unfortunate because in Ripper lore, the early hours of September 30th, 1888 is known as the night of the double event. About an hour after midnight, a cart turned into Dutfield's yard, and the pony pulling it spooked. The driver saw a woman's body on the ground and lit a match to make sure it wasn't his wife. It wasn't.
He slit my throat from left to right. He severed my windpipe.
The victim was a prostitute named Liz Stride. She had been dead less than a few minutes when she was found. Her throat had been slit, but that's all.
Her throat was slashed in a way that's somewhat similar to Jack the Ripper, but no mutilations took place. And this is one of the reasons why Elizabeth Stride is not always considered to be a Ripper victim. Some people say it was completely unrelated. It was just a coincidence that she was murdered that night. Others believe that Jack the Ripper was interrupted, that perhaps Louis Diemschutz, who was coming home from a night selling jewelry, actually scared the killer after the throat had been slit, but before the mutilations had taken place. And so the killer ran off, and in theory at least, ran off to Mitre Square, which was about a 15 or 20 minute walk away.
And it was in Mitre Square that the Ripper struck again. Less than an hour after someone slit Liz Stride's throat, someone did the same to Catherine Eddowes. And the slit throat was just the beginning.
He slit my throat, cut open my abdomen, and pulled out my intestines. He sliced through my uterus and left kidney, which he took with him.
Not only was Catherine Eddowes' throat slashed, not only were there abdominal mutilations, were there organs missing, were there innards thrown all over the place, but her face was also marked up and nicked around the eyes and on the cheeks.
What this guy did is he got him from the rear, then got him down, then was ripping through their clothing and doing what I call slash and grab, where he was mutilating the hell out of them and grabbing organs and throwing their intestines out of the way.
The terrible mutilations suffered by Catherine Eddowes were viewed by most people as an escalation of savagery on the part of the unknown killer. But Ivor Edwards thinks they're an indication of something altogether different.
My theory is that the murders were committed by Robert Donstan Stevenson, who studied black magic. We know that in ritual murder, mutilation of the dead is a practice which is performed.
And there may have been something ritualistic about where the killings occurred.
Now, when Donstan planned the murders, it's my belief that he planned them on a map. Here we have a period map of Whitechapel.
Edwards has calculated every detail of the map and sums up a striking observation.
The distance from victim number 1 to victim number 2 is 930 yards, using the scale on the map. The distance between victim 2 and victim 4, again, is exactly 930 yards.
Furthermore, the murder sites point roughly east, west, south, and almost north. And if you connect the 4 points, a cross is formed, if we allow for a tiny 63-yard adjustment that would have afforded Donston greater privacy and cover to kill Annie Chapman.
They were sacrifices, and it's well known that sacrifices can be committed at the 4 points of the cross.
Whether or not the slaying of Catherine Eddowes was part of a demonic map-making exercise, or simply the latest demonstration of a serial killer's bloodlust, it turned out to offer investigators past and present an enigmatic sidebar to this most recent murder. A piece of bloody apron and a bit of chalk that may or may not have been a clue. A few blocks away from Jack the Ripper's gruesome murder scene in Mitre Square, police found a piece of bloody cloth that matched a piece missing from Catherine Eddowes' apron. Near it was a line of graffiti written in chalk. Those who saw it later recalled that it said, "The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing." Note the odd spelling of the word Jews. Unfortunately, the superintendent of police ordered the words removed almost immediately, so we'll never know exactly how they were written or what they said. But it poses the question, were the piece of bloody apron and the graffiti connected? Some ripperologists believe the word Jews refers to 3 men mentioned in the writings of a super-secret organization everyone has heard of but knows nothing about, namely, the Freemasons. But the Freemasons deny any connection between the graffiti and their secret rituals.
The word Jewess is never used in the Masonic ritual. The 2 letters JU are the first syllable of the names of some of the people that are spoken about in the Masonic ritual, but they're never referred to as the Jewess or anything even closely resembling that word.
For the Freemasons, being accused of taking part in a conspiracy is nothing new.
Supposedly, Masons were the ones who started the French Revolution. Masons were the ones who started the American Revolution. Masons committed murders at various times in order to stop someone from giving away the Masonic secrets. If somebody wants to believe that the Jack the Ripper murders were a Masonic conspiracy, you can stretch some of the evidence to fit your theory. For example, all of them did have their throats cut. And there is a part of the Masonic ritual that refers to the old-fashioned method of execution that included cutting one's throat. But the murder victims might have had their throats cut not because of Masonic ritual, but simply because it was the quickest way for the murderer to silence them.
To my mind, it was not written by the killer. Certainly the killer dumped the piece of apron there, but personally, and this is only my opinion, I think the message was already chalked there. Had the killer wiped his hands and thrown the piece of apron in the next doorway, then we'd all be arguing about a different piece of wall writing.
Other facts argue against the Masonic connection, like the nature of the injuries.
The mutilations that took place in the 5 murder victims were all different. So if somebody was trying to get across the message that this was a Masonic conspiracy, they did a terrible job of doing it, because they didn't do it in the way that a Mason who knows Masonry, who knows the Masonic ritual, would do.
Even so, the Masonic angle is prominently featured in one of the most popular Ripper theories. It has been the subject of a book, a series of comic books, and a film starring Johnny Depp. It's usually called the Royal Conspiracy Theory, and the case, such as it is, goes like this. Prince Edward, Queen Victoria's grandson, had an affair with a prostitute and got her pregnant. She let 5 fellow prostitutes in on the secret. They had to be silenced. Dr. William Gull, surgeon to the Queen and a Freemason, wielded the knife that kept the secret safe. Once all 5 women were dead, there was no need to kill anyone else, so the Ripper murders stopped. There are any number of problems with the royal conspiracy theory, but that's not surprising, considering its source.
The royal conspiracy theory itself relies on very shaky evidence supplied by a man called Joseph Sickert, who claimed to have been a descendant of Walter Sickert, who himself was a Jack the Ripper suspect.
And Joseph Sickert said that his father, Walter Sickert, had told him the story of what really happened in the Jack the Ripper murders, because his father was involved, not as the murderer, but was involved in knowing what the story was. And Joseph Sickert told the story in detail to Stephen Knight, and Stephen Knight wrote what became a best-selling book describing the story.
Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution was published in the 70s, and a few years later, Joseph Sickert said, I made all that up, it's not really true.
The movie makers love royal conspiracies, Freemasonry, secret rites and everything. It's just a total nonsense, but of course it's the stuff of Hollywood.
So as it turns out, it's likely that the royal conspiracy theory is a Ripper whopper, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing, except maybe at the box office. With the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the same night, the Ripper case became a worldwide sensation.
By this time, the first and second week of November 1888, the Jack the Ripper murders were in every newspaper, not only in London, not only all over the UK, but around the world.
Letters claiming to be from the Ripper continued to show up at newspapers and police stations, including one that arrived with a body part.
It was accompanied by half a human kidney, which the writer obviously claimed came from Catherine Eddowes, whose left kidney had been taken.
Though that particular letter has been lost, hundreds of other letters are being kept in Britain's National Archives, where forensic paper analyst Peter Bauer has had the chance to study them, looking for similarities to Walter Sickert's work. One piece of Ripper correspondence caught Bauer's attention.
This is a Ripper letter, and it has a curious guillotined edge.
A slanted edge, unlike the typical 90-degree angle achieved in most batch cuts.
Looking amongst the Gurney ivory-laid papers used by Sickert, we find the same characteristics.
The same angled edge and the same watermark.
These watermarks are produced by a dandy roll. Now, those watermarks aren't exactly identical, even though they're supposed to be.
And the watermark on the Ripper letter appears to match the watermark on the Sickert letter.
And as you can see, the wide stroke of the N there and the top of this serif on this stroke, they're both angled at a very slight angle. And here we see in one of Sickert's letters, we see the same characteristics at the top of the N.
And Bauer's conclusion?
Every detail of these sheets says to me that they came from the same batch of paper. And the cut tells me that they came from the same quire.
This means that Walter Sickert was writing on paper that came from the same 24-sheet package or quire as 2 of the Ripper letters.
For sure, at least some of these letters were written by the same person, because the likelihood of 2 different people writing letters on paper that came from the same roll from one batch is pretty improbable.
Handwriting analysis was another obvious approach, and for that, Cornwell turned to experts in Tennessee.
Patricia Cornwell was touring Oak Ridge National Laboratory one day when she was in Knoxville, and she saw that I was doing a lot of image analysis work, and she thought we could apply image analysis techniques to help with the handwriting analysis.
So senior research scientist Ralph Dinwiddie joined forces with John Williams, a forensic trainer, to investigate. Williams sees handwriting analysis as a promising new trade tool in the absence of hard evidence.
It's not like DNA analysis, or it's not like a fingerprint comparison where you get absolute positive identification, but it is very close to comparing footwear, tire impressions, things like that, because you have known styles and sampling.
In this case, the known samples are hundreds of handwritten letters. Letters claiming to be from Jack the Ripper, and letters we know Walter Sickert wrote. Dinwiddie and Williams went to work isolating Sickert's recurring character combinations, and are comparing them to some of the same formations found in the Ripper samples.
The word "you" in this Sickert document has several unique characteristics. You notice the way the Y is formed. It almost looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top. And you go right into the U, which is a nice little squiggle. If we come over to the Ripper document and look at one of the versions of the word "you" here, again, you see the Y that looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top, and we go right in at the top to form the squiggle of the U. Very similar characteristics.
Between probably 10 of the Ripper documents, we've made some comparisons with the known Walter Sickert documents, and we see some very good consistencies there. It certainly raises the suspicion of this being the same person.
Though not everyone accepts Cornwell's research results, it seems possible, even likely, that Walter Sickert did in fact write at least some of the Ripper letters. That makes him a prankster with a bit of a morbid streak. But what does Patricia Cornwell think might have made him a killer? In London's East End, the month of October came and went without another killing. So did the first week of November. Then, shortly before noon on November 9th, a man named Thomas Bowyer paid a visit to Mary Kelly's boarding room to collect her overdue rent money. The door was locked, but through a window, Bowyer was confronted by a scene straight out of hell. Mary Kelly was lying on a bed, ripped to pieces.
Her mutilation is unlike anything I have ever seen, either in a photograph or at a crime scene or in the morgue.
He butchered me, just like I was a pig or a rabbit.
He actually skinned approximately 30 or 40% of her body, removed huge chunks of flesh, removed her breasts, removed her organs. He also removed the heart, which was never done for any previous Ripper victim. Her face was almost completely de-skinned. Murder is one thing, but mutilating almost to the point of just completely removing that person's complete identity is something entirely different. When everyday Londoners were reading about it, it was just, how could one person do this to another human being? It's the ultimate expression of Jack the Ripper's insanity, of this rage against women.
Ivor Edwards has a different take. For him, the murder of Mary Kelly in her room at Miller's Court simply provided Donston the final marker he needed to complete his desecration. After profaning the cross, Donston had taken aim at an ancient Christian symbol called the Vesica Pisces. And once again, it's all about yardages.
The distance between victim 3 to Kelly is again exactly 950 yards.
And if you use a compass to connect the murder sites of Catherine Eddowes, Mary Kelly, the intended site of Annie Chapman, and a point near the site of Polly Nichols, and then apply another arc of the same radius to pass through the site of Elizabeth Stride's murder, you form a Vesica Pisces.
This is not a coincidence. To achieve that, you've got to use a compass and you've got to plan it in advance. This is absolute proof that these murders were premeditated. They weren't done on the spur of the moment.
Edwards' occultist interpretation of the basic Ripper facts and lore is certainly ingenious, even elegant. But as with every theory connected to the Ripper case, it's not hard to find skeptics.
Killing individuals in specific locations to send some sort of symbolic message almost never happens. I don't know of one case where it actually happened that was documented.
Well, Ivor's theory, I don't even understand Ivor's theory. Quite honestly.
The problem with this theory is that the Vesica Pisces doesn't exactly work even when applied in the best way. I think one of the murder spots, I think that of Annie Chapman on Hanbury Street, doesn't quite attach itself to that line. The explanation is that, oh, well, you know, if he followed where the line went, it would have been in the middle of the street. He couldn't have committed a murder there, so obviously he moved it just a few steps over.
If you have a number of killings, 5 or 6 killings in a particular area, you could connect dots any way you want and make letters. It could be a K, it could be a J, it could be anything.
But no matter who the killer was, most students of the Ripper case would agree that there was some sexual component to his acts.
In sexual serial murder cases, there's a fusion of sex and aggression so that the aggressive act itself is eroticized. And he wants to arouse himself. He wants to stimulate himself. He's developed, for whatever multiple reasons there are, an arousal pattern where violence and sadism is stimulating.
Today, we know that sexual killers often suffer some traumatic event in childhood, something that shapes the way the sex drive develops. And Cornwell thinks she spotted something in Walter Sickert's childhood that might well qualify as traumatic.
There have been several mentions in biographical works that he had 3 surgeries by the time he was 5 for something called a fistula, which is basically like an abscess or some kind of hole that's not supposed to be there. And it had to have been very serious because the conditions back in those days were so grim and so dangerous. You didn't risk surgery unless it was profoundly important.
Cornwell decided to ask Sickert's nephew about it.
I said to him one day, I've read a number of things about your uncle having a fistula. What was that? He said, oh, he had a hole in it. He was born with a hole in his penis. And I went, oh. And I thought, that ain't good.
Many historians dispute this version of the story, pointing out that Sickert visited a prominent rectal surgeon for his fistula, not a urologist. But if Cornwell's story is true,